The small town of Maplewood was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, at least by face if not by name. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, it had a charm that outsiders often found quaint, but locals cherished deeply. The heart of the town was its high school, a modest brick building surrounded by sprawling fields where students gathered during lunch breaks or after-school practices. Mrs. Emily Carter had been teaching at Maplewood High for nearly 15 years. To her colleagues, she was known as the teacher who went above and beyond, always staying late to help struggling students, organizing fundraisers for classroom supplies, and finding creative ways to make learning fun. But what set Emily apart wasn't just her dedication. It was her ability to see potential in every child, even those who seemed invisible to everyone else. Jake Thompson was one such student. A lanky teenager with messy brown hair and tired eyes, Jake rarely spoke unless called upon in class, and even then, his answers were short and mumbled. His grades were slipping, he often arrived late, and he sat alone at the back of the room, avoiding eye contact with both teachers and peers. Most people assumed he simply didn't care, but Emily saw something different beneath the surface. Pain. She couldn't put her finger on it at first. Maybe it was the way he slouched in his seat, as though carrying an invisible weight, or the faint sadness in his expression when he thought no one was looking. Whatever it was, Emily felt compelled to reach out. She started small, leaving encouraging notes on his assignments and asking casual questions about his weekends. At first, Jake responded with shrugs or monosyllabic answers, but Emily persisted, determined to break through the walls he'd built around himself. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the final bell rang and students poured out of classrooms, Emily stood by the window of her classroom, watching them scatter across the parking lot and sidewalks. Her gaze lingered on Jake, who trudged along the edge of the road, shoulders hunched against the chilly breeze. Something about the way he walked, slowly, almost aimlessly, made her uneasy. Little did she know, this seemingly ordinary day would soon become extraordinary. A moment that would change not only Jake's life but hers as well. The wind picked up as Jake crossed the street, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie. His mind was elsewhere, replaying snippets of arguments he'd overheard between his parents the night before, worrying about unpaid bills that had been mentioned in hushed tones, and dreading the pile of homework waiting for him at home. He barely noticed the world around him until it was almost too late. A car sped around the corner, its tires screeching as the driver realized they were approaching the crosswalk far too quickly. Time seemed to slow as Jake froze mid-step, his eyes widening in shock. The vehicle barreled toward him, its horn blaring, but Jake couldn't move. He was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. Across the street, Emily sat at an outdoor table outside the cozy cafe where she often graded papers after school. Her red pen hovered over a workbook as her attention drifted to the sound of squealing brakes. Looking up, she spotted Jake standing in the middle of the road, oblivious to the danger hurtling toward him. Without a second thought, she bolted from her seat, clutching her notebook tightly as she sprinted across the pavement. "Jake!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Reaching him just in time, Emily grabbed his arm and yanked him backward with all her strength. They stumbled onto the sidewalk together, narrowly avoiding the speeding car, which swerved wildly before disappearing down the road. The driver didn't stop. For a moment, neither of them moved. Jake sat trembling on the cold concrete, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Emily knelt beside him, her heart pounding as she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked urgently, scanning him for injuries. "Did you get hit? Are you hurt?" Jake shook his head, still too shaken to speak. Tears welled up in his eyes as the reality of what had just happened sank in. He could have died if not for Emily. Emily wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close. "It's all right now," she murmured soothingly. "You're safe. Just breathe." They stayed like that for several minutes, the noise of the town fading into the background as Jake slowly regained his composure. When he finally found his voice, it came out in a whisper. I didn't see it coming." "I know," Emily said gently. "But you're okay. That's what matters." As Jake wiped his tears away, Emily noticed how young and vulnerable he looked. a stark contrast to the guarded demeanor he usually wore at school. She realized this was more than just a close call. Something deeper was weighing on him, and she needed to understand why. "Come on," she said softly, helping him to his feet. "Let's walk you home." The short journey to Jake's house was quiet at first, both of them processing the events of the afternoon. But as they walked, Emily began asking gentle questions, steering the conversation toward what might be troubling him. At first, Jake hesitated, unsure whether to open up to someone he barely knew. But there was something about Emily's calm presence and genuine concern that made him feel safe. "My parents are getting divorced," he admitted quietly, staring at the ground. "It's been really hard, and money's tight. Sometimes I don't even know if we'll make rent." Emily listened intently, nodding to encourage him to continue. As Jake spoke, the pieces began falling into place. His distracted behavior in class, his lack of focus, the weight he carried everywhere he went. It all stemmed from the turmoil at home. By the time they reached his front door, Jake felt lighter, as though unloading some of his burdens had eased the pressure slightly. Before saying goodbye, Emily gave him a warm smile. "You're stronger than you think, Jake," she told him sincerely. "And remember, I'm here if you ever need to talk. You're not alone in this." Jake nodded, gratitude flickering in his eyes. For the first time in months, he felt like someone truly cared. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. As Emily turned to leave, she glanced back at Jake one last time. Little did either of them know this day would mark the beginning of a profound change. Not just for Jake, but for both of them. The days following the accident were different for Jake. Not drastically so, but enough that he noticed a shift in how he felt. The near-death experience had shaken him deeply, forcing him to confront emotions he'd tried so hard to bury. And then there was Emily. Her kindness lingered in his mind like a comforting presence, reminding him that someone out there genuinely cared. At school, Emily made a point of checking in with Jake daily. She didn't push too hard. Instead, she offered small gestures of encouragement. A smile when their eyes met, an extra minute after class to ask how he was doing, or a note scribbled at the top of his assignment saying, "Keep going, you're doing great." Slowly but surely, these tiny acts of compassion began to chip away at the walls Jake had built around himself. One afternoon, after noticing Jake lingering behind in the classroom, Emily approached him cautiously. "Hey," she said, her tone warm and inviting. "Is everything okay?" Jake hesitated, staring at the floor. He wasn't used to sharing his thoughts with anyone, let alone a teacher. But something about Emily's steady gaze made him feel safe. Finally, he shrugged. "I guess I'm just tired of everything." Emily nodded, pulling up a chair beside him. "Tell me more," she urged gently. "What's weighing on you?" For the first time, Jake opened up fully. He talked about the constant arguments between his parents, the nights he spent lying awake listening to them fight, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness that came with watching his family fall apart. He confessed how embarrassed he felt about their financial struggles, knowing other kids at school didn't have to worry about things like keeping the lights on or having enough food for dinner. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice cracking. "Sometimes it feels like no matter how hard I try, nothing gets better." Emily listened intently, her heart breaking for the boy sitting across from her. When he finished, she reached out and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "First of all, Jake, none of this is your fault," she said firmly. "You're carrying so much on your own, and I want you to know you don't have to face it alone. We'll figure things out together, one step at a time." Her words brought tears to Jake's eyes, though he blinked them away quickly. No adult had ever spoken to him like that, with such sincerity and understanding. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Over the next few weeks, Emily became a steady source of support for Jake. She helped him create a plan to catch up on missed assignments, staying late after school to tutor him whenever he needed extra help. She encouraged him to talk to the school counselor about his home situation, assuring him it was okay to seek additional support. And most importantly, she reminded him repeatedly that his worth wasn't tied to his grades or circumstances. But beyond academics, Emily also worked to rebuild Jake's confidence. One day, during a science lesson on engineering principles, she noticed him sketching designs for a simple machine in the margins of his notebook. Intrigued, she leaned over and asked, "What's this?" Jake flushed, embarrassed at being caught doodling. "It's nothing," he mumbled. "Just something I was thinking about." "It's not nothing," Emily countered, smiling. "This is impressive. Have you ever thought about joining the robotics club? They're always looking for creative minds like yours." Jake shook his head immediately. "I wouldn't know where to start," he said, self-doubt creeping into his voice. "Besides, I'm not smart enough for that kind of stuff." Emily frowned, leaning closer. "Don't say that. You're smarter than you give yourself credit for. Trust me, you'd be amazing at it. Why don't we look into it together?" Though hesitant, Jake agreed to attend a meeting with Emily's encouragement. To his surprise, he found himself enjoying the process of brainstorming ideas and working collaboratively with others. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of excitement about learning, and it was contagious. As weeks turned into months, Jake's transformation became evident to everyone around him. His grades improved, he started participating more in class discussions, and he even began forming friendships with some of his robotics teammates. Teachers who had once written him off as disengaged now praised his progress, marveling at the change in his attitude and work ethic. Through it all, Emily remained Jake's biggest cheerleader. She celebrated his successes, big and small, and offered guidance when challenges arose. More than anything, she reminded him that setbacks were part of the journey, and that resilience was key to overcoming them. One evening, as they reviewed project plans for the upcoming STEM competition, Jake looked up at Emily with gratitude shining in his eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," he said softly. "If it weren't for you, I don't think I'd be here right now." Emily smiled, shaking her head. "You don't need to thank me, Jake. All I did was remind you of what you already knew deep down, that you're capable of incredible things. The rest is all you." Jake nodded, determination flickering in his expression. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving. And for the first time in a long time, he believed in himself. The robotics club quickly became Jake's sanctuary, a place where he could escape the chaos of home and immerse himself in something that truly excited him. Under Emily's guidance, he threw himself into the team's project for the statewide STEM competition. Their goal was ambitious: design and build a robotic arm capable of sorting recyclables with precision. It wasn't just about winning. It was about proving to himself that he could rise above the struggles that had once defined him. At first, Jake doubted his abilities. He'd never considered himself tech-savvy or particularly innovative, but Emily saw potential in him that he couldn't yet see in himself. "You have a knack for problem-solving," she told him during one of their brainstorming sessions. "Trust your instincts. They'll take you far." Encouraged by her words, Jake began contributing ideas more confidently. He sketched designs, tested prototypes, and collaborated closely with his teammates. Each step forward came with its share of setbacks. Motors that wouldn't function properly, sensors that failed mid-test, and countless late nights spent troubleshooting. But Jake refused to give up. With every challenge, he grew more determined, fueled by the belief that failure was simply part of the process. Emily often stayed late to help the team, offering advice when they hit roadblocks and cheering them on when morale dipped. She brought snacks on busy evenings, played motivational playlists over the classroom speakers, and reminded everyone to celebrate small victories along the way. Her presence kept the group grounded, ensuring no one lost sight of why they were working so hard. As the competition approached, tensions ran high. The team worked tirelessly to perfect their robot, fine-tuning every detail until it operated seamlessly. Jake took charge of programming the arm's movements, pouring hours into writing code and debugging errors. His focus was unshakable, driven by the knowledge that this project represented more than just a school assignment. It was proof that he could achieve greatness despite the odds stacked against him. Finally, the day of the competition arrived. Held at a convention center in the state capital, the event buzzed with energy as teams from across the region showcased their creations. Jake and his teammates set up their booth nervously, adjusting cables and double-checking connections under Emily's watchful eye. When it was their turn to present, Jake stood confidently beside the robot, explaining its features and demonstrating its capabilities. His voice was steady, his explanations clear, and his passion undeniable. As the judges asked questions and observed the robot in action, Jake felt a surge of pride, not just for what they'd built, but for how far he'd come since the days when he barely spoke in class. Hours later, the results were announced. When Jake's team heard their name called as winners of first place, the room erupted in cheers. They had done it. They'd beaten dozens of other schools to claim the top prize. But the victory wasn't just about the trophy. It came with a full scholarship to a prestigious university for each member of the team. Jake's knees nearly buckled as he accepted his award, tears streaming down his face. He turned to find Emily standing nearby, clapping enthusiastically with tears in her eyes. After the ceremony, she pulled him aside for a quiet moment. "I'm so proud of you, Jake," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is just the beginning. You've proven to yourself, and to everyone else, that you're unstoppable." Jake nodded, overwhelmed by gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You believed in me when no one else did. I'll never forget that." Over the next few weeks, the entire school celebrated the team's achievement. Teachers praised Jake for his leadership, classmates congratulated him on his win, and even his parents, despite their strained relationship, expressed pride in his accomplishments. For the first time in years, Jake felt seen and valued, not just for what he'd achieved, but for who he was becoming. The experience transformed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He started dreaming bigger, imagining a future filled with possibilities instead of limitations. Engineering wasn't just a hobby anymore, it was his calling. And Emily? She remained a constant source of encouragement, reminding him that his potential knew no bounds. Years passed, and Jake's life took a trajectory he once thought impossible. The scholarship from the STEM competition opened doors that had previously seemed locked forever. He enrolled at one of the country's top universities, majoring in mechanical engineering, a field he'd fallen in love with thanks to Emily's encouragement. College wasn't easy. Balancing rigorous coursework, internships, and financial challenges tested his resilience. But Jake faced every obstacle with the same determination he'd shown during those late nights in the robotics lab. Emily stayed in touch throughout his journey, sending occasional emails or texts to check on him. "How's the next big inventor doing?" she'd write, always signing off with words of encouragement. Her messages reminded Jake of where he'd come from and motivated him to keep pushing forward. In turn, Jake would reply with updates about his classes, projects, and dreams for the future. Their bond remained strong, even as miles separated them. By his senior year, Jake had distinguished himself as a standout student. His capstone project, an advanced robotic system designed to assist people with disabilities, earned national recognition. Companies began reaching out, eager to recruit him before graduation. When he accepted a job offer from a cutting-edge tech firm known for innovation, Jake knew he was stepping into a world brimming with opportunity. But despite his professional success, Jake never forgot the roots of his journey, or the woman who had changed everything. On a crisp autumn morning several years later, he returned to Maplewood, this time driving a sleek car that symbolized just how far he'd come. As he pulled into the familiar parking lot of Maplewood High, nostalgia washed over him. The building looked the same, but Jake felt like an entirely different person. He found Emily grading papers in her classroom, her red pen moving steadily across the pages. She glanced up when he knocked lightly on the doorframe, her eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply smiled, the years melting away as if no time had passed. "Jake Thompson," Emily said finally, rising from her desk. "Look at you. You look incredible." "So do you," Jake replied, stepping inside. "Though I think your hair might be grayer than I remember." Emily laughed, brushing a strand of gray-streaked hair behind her ear. "Well, teaching teenagers will do that to you." They hugged warmly, and Jake felt a lump rise in his throat. Seeing Emily again brought back a flood of memories. The accident, the late-night tutoring sessions, the robotics project, and all the moments in between that had shaped him into the man he was today. "I wanted to come see you," Jake began, his voice thick with emotion, "to thank you properly. I don't think I've ever told you how much you mean to me." Emily shook her head, waving off his gratitude. "You don't need to thank me, Jake. Watching you succeed has been reward enough." "But I do," Jake insisted, pulling a small envelope from his pocket. Inside was a handwritten letter and a photo of him standing beside his robotic invention at a recent industry conference. "I wrote this to remind you of what you did for me, not just saving my life that day, but believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. You gave me a chance when no one else did, and because of that, I'm living a life I never dreamed possible." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she read the letter. It was filled with heartfelt appreciation, recounting specific moments where her guidance had made all the difference. When she finished, she folded it carefully and placed it in her desk drawer, a keepsake she'd treasure forever. "You inspire me, Jake," Emily said softly. "Every teacher hopes to make a difference, but hearing stories like yours reminds me why I chose this path in the first place. You're proof that kindness and belief can change lives." Their reunion lasted hours, with Jake sharing stories about his college experiences, his career, and the ways Emily's lessons continued to guide him. Before leaving, he promised to stay in touch, and to return someday to mentor students just as Emily had mentored him. True to his word, Jake began volunteering at local schools, speaking to young people about perseverance, education, and the importance of finding mentors. He often recounted his own story, emphasizing that no matter how difficult life seemed, there was always hope, and sometimes all it took was one person to show you the way. Meanwhile, Emily reflected on the ripple effects of her actions. Saving Jake from the speeding car had been instinctual, but the decision to invest in his life afterward had transformed both their futures. She realized anew the profound impact teachers could have, not just through lessons taught in classrooms, but through the lives they touched along the way. Years later, Jake stood at the front of a packed auditorium, addressing a group of high school students much like his younger self. The event was part of a mentorship program he'd helped launch, aimed at encouraging underprivileged youth to pursue careers in STEM fields. As he scanned the sea of faces, some eager, some skeptical, he couldn't help but think back to the day Emily had pulled him from the street and into a brighter future. "I wasn't always sure I belonged here," Jake began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "In fact, there were times when I thought my life was over before it even started. But then someone came along who changed everything. Not because they had to, but because they cared." He went on to share his story. The struggles at home, the near-fatal accident, and the teacher who refused to give up on him. He spoke about how Emily's belief in him had sparked a chain reaction, a journey that led him from a small-town classroom to the forefront of technological innovation. And as he recounted those pivotal moments, he saw nods of understanding and flickers of hope in the eyes of the students listening intently. After the presentation, a shy girl approached him, clutching a notebook to her chest. "Do you really think people like us can make it?" she asked hesitantly. "Even if things are hard at home?" Jake knelt down so they were eye level. "Absolutely," he said with conviction. "It won't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is. Find someone who believes in you, even if it's just one person, and let them remind you of your potential. That's what happened to me, and look where I am now." The girl smiled tentatively, and Jake handed her a business card. "If you ever need advice or encouragement, don't hesitate to reach out. You're capable of amazing things. I promise." Back in Maplewood, Emily watched a video clip of Jake's speech online, her heart swelling with pride. She hadn't expected fame or recognition for saving Jake's life, or for guiding him afterward, but seeing the impact he was making brought her immense joy. It reinforced something she'd always believed, that teaching wasn't just about imparting knowledge. It was about planting seeds of possibility and nurturing them until they blossomed. One afternoon, as Emily prepared for another day of classes, a former student stopped by her classroom. "Ms. Carter," the young man said, holding out a handmade card. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." Because of you, I decided to apply to college. I got in. Emily accepted the card with tears in her eyes, hugging the student tightly. Moments like these reminded her why she loved her job. The little victories, the quiet transformations, the lives forever changed by acts of kindness. That evening, as Emily locked up her classroom and walked through the empty halls, she paused by the window overlooking the crosswalk where she'd saved Jake years ago. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the pavement. She thought about how one split-second decision, to run toward danger instead of away from it, had set off a ripple effect that touched countless lives. As she drove home, Emily reflected on the power of compassion. Teachers, parents, friends, they all played roles in shaping the world, one act of kindness at a time. Hers had been saving Jake, believing in him, and giving him the tools to succeed. His, in turn, had been paying it forward, inspiring others to dream bigger and aim higher. And so, the cycle continued, a testament to the idea that even the smallest gestures could create waves of change. Whether through courage, mentorship, or simply showing up when someone needed support, every action mattered. Every life touched carried the potential to transform others. The story ends not with fanfare or grand declarations, but with a simple truth. Kindness has no expiration date. Its effects linger long after the moment has passed, weaving connections between hearts and reminding us that we are never truly alone.